how Community Hope began in the first place and how it began to grow, and how we are still part of that growing right now. You can imagine a group of men and women who were answering the call to learn to do something they'd never done before, to become lay pastoral caregivers in a very large hospital. That's where I found myself. It was in 1994. The hospital was in the heart of the Texas Medical Center, right across the street from the very famous, well-known cancer hospital, MD Anderson. And our pastoral care department, which was all Episcopal clergy, there were 7 of us, and I was the only woman who had ever been brought into that place. They, the administration, gave us white, stiff, starched coats that looked just like the doctor's coats, but on it said pastoral care and identified your title. And then one day, an Episcopal man that was kind of well known, I mean, he was a newspaper editor. We'd all visited him. His name was Dan Cobb. And as Dan was released from the hospital from his stay, we'd all been in and out of his room, he came downstairs, and I'd gotten to know him, of course, and so he pulled me aside and he said, "Helen, I just want to tell you that you folks in your white coats and your collars do a good job. But I was up there long enough to realize that we need a lot of people just like me. We need a lot of lay people to do the work that you can't do in between, to come and sit and listen and just be with us and be in and out of the rooms, because there are only a handful of you and there are hundreds of us." And it was just like, but he also said it so others could hear it. They came to me and said, "Helen, you heard what Dan said. We think it's a good idea for you to begin to think about what we're going to do about that." Of course, I was just so thrilled to be asked to do something that might measure up a little. It's a little hard to know how to behave in a setting where you're trying to find your footing, where to drop your anchor, where to say, "This is where I am." And oh yes, I will work on it. Yes, I'll work on it. I had finished an on-call night, and it had been a long night, up all night, most of the night. So that evening when I went home that afternoon, I couldn't sleep. You don't sleep in the middle of the day. But it was hot. It was a hot June afternoon. Before I decided to try to sleep, I went to swim. And I had this question on me. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? What are you going to think about it? And I said, "Lord, I can't think about anything. I'm just giving it to you. But I know I'll hear something." And so I floated, I swam, and then I floated again. And then, as though it was just almost like a little thundering, "Helen." But that was just an interior Helen. And then I heard, "Start a community called Hope, and I will provide the rest." And it was not me. I didn't think of it. I remember being I just chilled. I just turned to some kind of other creature. And I literally sprang out of that water like, I don't know, like a flying fish or something. Now suddenly I was over on the beach chair by the pool. And I said, "Lord, is that you?" I was almost afraid to ask, but it was not like any moment I've ever known. And then I heard a same very much gentler sound, same lines, "Start a community called Hope, and I will provide the rest." Well, I knew that wasn't me. It was just beyond anything I could have ever imagined or thought about. And so I just sat there. I probably cried a little bit. You've got to cry somewhere along the way. It was like I was on a new path, and I knew nothing except to begin to, and I didn't know the word listen, truly. You know, did you really think about listening until you finally read the rule of Benedict? I mean, maybe you were a listener all your life, and maybe I listened some, but mostly I listened when I heard my mother say, now listen here. But somewhere I just knew that day that life was going to be different, because I had heard something that I knew with all my heart was not from me. It was not any experience that I have ever had before or have had since. And so that night was pretty tumultuous, upside down. But the next day when I went into the hospital, they were all beginning to ask me, you know, we heard Dan, and we've been talking about this. So Helen, what do you think? I said, I want to share with you something. And I tried to tell them a little of my experience. And so it wasn't long until we had a luncheon. The letter went out to just the parishes that were within about a 3-mile range of the hospital. It was Episcopal. And I think we have to help ourselves keep widening that vision, because God calls all of us. He's not looking at what's written over the name of the building where we go to worship. But that was the way it was working. Whatever happened, it was taking place. And we had just a sprinkling of people from those churches who came to this lunch. And within a pretty short time, we had a wonderful group of men and women who had said we would really, really love to have a way to be trained, to know how to assist you all and do what you do, but in the way that you want us to do it. And when you look back at that, it's just God's writing out the script. And so the next thing that happened is that we invited several of the people that had shown an interest to come and start sitting together. And then some of the people on our staff who had done pastoral educational programs in other places, because we had our chaplains who were trained, who were on our staff, were not all just from one location. So we began to share ideas from different parts of the country. And as that began to happen, we saw that there was a pattern for the topics that are the topics of our curriculum. There was a woman who was in charge of development and was very interested in expanding her own spiritual life. And that woman was Carla Cooper, as director of development. And she was really eager, as we have that journey, to anchor her spiritual life in a practice, in a church. She said, this lady named Esther DeWall is very big in Anglican spirituality, and she's going to be at a Benedictine, and I was listening, I didn't know what that meant, a Benedictine monastery in New Mexico. I think I can figure it out to get us over there to do that. And this is how God works in our lives. That's what this story is not about. Well, it's about how we began, yes. But it's about to be reminded one more time, when we just keep waiting and listening and wondering. Keep that wonder alive. That, you just can hardly wait to taste what it's really going to taste like. And within about 3 weeks, we were on a plane to Albuquerque. I knew that what was happening was a God thing, was so incredibly sacred. I knew it was the right thing to do, and it was easy, and it was fun. And so when we arrived, people had come from all walks of life to hear the same reason we had come. God just drew us together in this wonderful, wonderful place. It was the beginning of a whole journey. Several years later, we had Esther DeWall come. We heard her speak then, but she came back as the keynote speaker. We had Community of Hope people come from a lot of places to hear Esther at that event. So that was the beginning of a whole new chapter. And right now we're writing that chapter. We're still writing that book. And I think that needs to be put in some kind of formation. It may be left up to you all to do, so that we can keep this story alive and do something really incredibly, if as God intends, to pray and to know how to follow what the next step is. And I'm challenging you, and I can't sit down and think of what's going to be said when we're talking about what only God knows and we're experiencing together. That is a thread of how we began this experience that we're having today. What I learned from Esther that trip, and what we took back and began to then take as steps to build Community of Hope. One of the women at that conference turned out to be in the first class. So you're part of that same thread. One person tells somebody else, and then the process just keeps growing as the gift continues to be given. Coming back from that conference, I began to realize that God's hand at work was giving us for today the foundation of administrative support, of the financial and administrative foundation and input that was needed, but it's the basic building blocks of how we would establish the Community of Hope. And then as that support, the next step or two, we invited more people from the community to become interested in what was being formed. Within the next 6 months, we had the first Community of Hope class. We did not have a written curriculum. We had an outline. There were enough of us who had never had those conversations to say, well, I can teach this, well, I can teach that. I can help write. It's no more the story today about then as it is about us now. At least that's how I see it. As you listen for which part of you, whatever you hear, is part of your life, and where you are, and where the hunger may be, and where the doors may be cracked, and people are peeking around the side to say, does anybody hear me? Is anybody listening? But this is, I think, how we discover that we are all called to carry the vision. We've been doing that with each other while we've been here, because they are us and we are them, which makes community. We can commune and commiserate over all of the same things. And just within the turning point of the first class, and by the way, the first Community of Hope class had 12 people. The invitation went out to a lot of folks. 12 showed up. One of the most important points that touches me over and over again is how the curriculum was formed. And I really didn't have a mind of my own then, and I need to remember that, because I need to let go of thinking that I'm going to think of it. That it's going to be, and I try so hard not to do that, but the people who know me well will say, no, Helen, you're not doing very well at that. because we all get pretty stubborn about, oh yeah, let's get it done, let's go for it. But I knew the curriculum had to be done with and by and for the people, but mostly by the people, by whoever was willing to step up to the plate. And so for about 6 to 8 months, we had writing retreats. We met and we worked on the curriculum as a team of 8 to 10 people. And we were from different parts of the city, different disciplines, men and women, but all focused on Benedictine spirituality and how to form a pastoral care curriculum out of that. And that was one of the most difficult things to accomplish, but one of the ones, when you know you're called to do something a certain and special way, don't let anybody water it down and make it different. And we knew it had to be a cross-discipline of men and women who would sit and chew over the words and discuss the points, a carving out of personalities and words and phrases, and that won't work and this isn't good, because we were trying to keep it in line with the rule and bring together what was meant to be our curriculum. And so when you open that book and start turning the pages, you're hearing the voices of a lot of people. For me, it was one of the richest times of creativity and listening and being together and making it happen. And so I hope you find the curriculum rich and helpful as you use it. As we did that, people were saying, they started their own communities of hope. We just kept growing until we had the curriculum finished, which I think tells us that we are, you and me, all of us, in all the contrasts of where we are and how we do it, we are still becoming. About everything to do with living life and being together. Talks about who we are as parts of the community. And if you will look at Scripture, 1st and 2nd Peter, the living stones. Living stones, I think, never quit moving around because they're living in water if they're in the stream. And it's very important for us to stay in the river, in the stream, remembering and holding on to the vows of our baptism and keeping alive within us that spark of the divine that came rushing through like the spark in the stubble of the dry field within us. So we're still filled with the waters of baptism, and let that fire burn deeply within you. Pray within it, live within it. Know that you might catch on fire any day if you just let God take over completely. Amen.